Thank you so much to Suha for the invitation, to Alsa Kal, and to the AA. I have a very long relationship with the AA that goes back to the 20th century, if you can imagine such an ancient time. I went there in 1998 to do my diploma and then started teaching in the year 2000. And the reason that I'm here with you is really because in 2005, I actually brought our students here to the AA, to Dubai from the AA, to study the Dubai condition, as it were. And those of you who just may have been at the Global Art Forum about a week ago today, will have seen a lecture by Rem Koolhaas and Charlie Koolhaas, which was looking back exactly at that sort of period of time. And that's a time when many of us, or several of us, arrived here and found ourselves never to leave. And that time was, specifically for me, it was December 2005. So it was 4 years after 9/11 and also a few years before the global financial crisis, and a sense of being hysterically wired for a post-West Gulf futurism, all of which changed my life in enormous ways, for which I'm eternally grateful. So I think, like many people that attended the AA, when it really works out for you, it continues to have a sort of huge, almost overbearing sentimental meaning in your life, because it sort of has the capacity to change the sort of pathway of your life. I'm just taking 6:55. Okay. So, if you want to know one of my least favorite questions to be asked, it's how are you? And recently, out of desperation, I've taken to answering it with this diagram. And maybe by the end of this short talk, it will make more sense. I want to offer up a few observations from recent work and even more recent pattern recognition. You see, my main obsession over the last decade has been around how change is changing, and change keeps changing. First, let's go back to 1967. This, on the left, is Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian professor of literature and media studies. He was very famous thanks to this book. On the right, the medium is the massage. This was produced by Jerome Agel, and it was designed by Quentin Fiore, and went on to become a mainstream cult success. There are many reasons why this book is important, not least for graphic designers, for example. It's considered one of the hallmarks of sort of form and content from the 20th century. But for me, there's this phrase which Agel wrote leading up to the book's release, where he talks about the book. He says, it predicts the present. It predicts the present. And 1967 is an important year in many ways, not least for a number of other books, such as Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle came out. Derrida's first book came out that year. And then also an interview with the science fiction writer J.G. Ballard, where he said in 1967, having written up till that point a number of novels that would be considered hard science fiction being where you sort of speculate 100, 200, few hundred years into the future in some sort of dystopian way to comment on the present. He said in 1967 that I am now turning my attention to the present moment because the present moment is changing so quickly that it could literally move in any direction. And so the uncertainty once applied to the future was being now located in the present. And I find it interesting that this was already felt at this specific year, it's 67. And the other thing that's, I think, beautiful about this book is how it takes very complex ideas about media, meaning, civilization, communication, language, identity, selfhood, and sort of remixes it in a way that, as Agol said, something a 10-year-old can understand. And this is something that I've taken quite seriously also as a brief, in a way. I think it's very easy to be complicated and use complicated language about complicated ideas. The hardest thing is to convey complicated ideas in a way that is simple and that many people can understand, and this book does that. And then Fiore described the brief for the book, again, extremely prescient, a dialogue between the computer and the book, a dialogue between the computer and the book, which I think is very, very beautiful. So in 2015, Douglas Coupland, a very well-known Canadian novelist who coined the phrase Generation X, and the whole reason that we use generations, such as millennials, Generation Y, Generation Z, Generation A, is because of Douglas. And he wrote a novel in 1991 called Generation X, Tales from an Accelerated Culture. Hans-Ulrich Obrist, the world's most intrepid interviewer and sleepless curator and director of the Serpentine Galleries in London. Myself and the graphic designer Wayne Daly produced this. The medium is the massage, updated for the 21st century. So since Marshall McLuhan died in 1980, he never got to see the digital world that we now immersively inhabit. So for the Age of Earthquakes, we invited 35 artists to provide imagery. We assembled a black and white paperback wired for eyes and fingers accustomed to swiping or scrolling, a book that swallowed the internet from the first half of the 2010s. This is how the book begins. Have you maybe noticed that our lives are no longer feeling like stories? Our lives are becoming a lineup of tasks. Our sense of time is beginning to shrink. So what is the extreme present? It's the realization that the causes of the modern condition are not going away. The forces driving the current world will only accelerate. There are 28 new words, neologisms in the book, and one of them is this, proceleration. So proceleration is the acceleration of acceleration. So you end up with a kind of a curve that is exponential like this. And the sum of these sensations is something that I call change vertigo. Change vertigo is that unsettling sense of drag where the future arrives at a faster pace than our psychological, emotional, and political capabilities can cope with. It's been 10 years since The Age of Earthquakes came out, and I was recently asked by Harper's Bazaar Italia to look back on both of our books and show how they've become more relevant as time has gone by. And it gives me a quiet but certain pleasure that our books have become more relevant. It's often the case that books, especially that try to somehow take the temperature of the current moment, often face the ignominy of being outdated very, very quickly, in the same way that, you know, a meme from last week that felt hot will feel cringe this week. And so I think the tradition of, you know, writing and publishing around futurism often falls into this trap. But I am relieved, and it's not just my opinion. It's been conveyed to me by many people that that certainly The Age of Earthquakes, which is, as I say, 10 years old, feels even more timely. So here are a few excerpts from this essay, which entails long captions referring to spreads in the book. So this is one of the key pages, and this is what I wrote reflecting on this recently. So this was one of the core themes of the Age of Earthquakes, that nano changes in human neurology brought about by the adoption of mass-scale digital technologies are occurring in parallel to man-made geological changes in Earth itself. The latter is felt most vividly in extreme weather. Floods, droughts, storms, smog. The 21st century, climatically speaking, is increasingly Old Testament in nature. It's no longer limited to a faraway third world, as we used to call it, but instead is ravaging everywhere, including the heart of Europe and the Hollywood Hills. We are caught in the schizophrenia between even more hyper-consumerism, think ultra-cheap Temu and ultra-fast Shein, versus reflecting on our collective responsibilities towards our damaged planet. This is a core aspect of the new age of extremes. In his dystopian novel, 1984, George Orwell wrote, quote, "A peace that was truly permanent could be the same as a permanent war," end quote. I'll say that again because I think it's a fantastic line. A peace that was truly permanent could be the same as a permanent war. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the political scientist Francis Fukuyama famously coined the phrase, "the end of history." His idea was that liberal democracy was the final form of human government, and the world would now bend towards this direction. A calm global order should then follow. However, since then, we've lived through the war on terror, was it even one, and seen the emergence of types of war that no longer involve tanks and missiles, but harness computer viruses and social media election interference. So if Orwell declared war is peace, we can also add a regretful footnote to that, which is war is forever. So all of this is a backdrop to our most recent book, kind of sequel, The Extreme Self. On the back it says, if you're wondering why the inside of your head feels so strange these days, this book has the answers. It's a new kind of graphic novel about whether individuality is morphing into something else. Some of you may have seen the exhibition at the Jameel Art Center 4 years ago, I think now, which was how the book was kind of R&D'd. I won't go into this today, but the book started actually as an exhibition in MoCA in Toronto in 2019. And then we brought it here to Dubai, and then the book came out in the summer of 2021. So it's also an interesting way in which one can use an exhibition to essentially generate, R&D generate, and then sort of produce a book if the contents of the book are sufficiently exhibition friendly enough. So the insides are portraits and self-portraits sourced from 70 different contributors. This time there are designers like Craig Green and musicians like Amnesia Scanner and Fatima Al-Qadiri, as well as technologists. And here's how this book starts. The 20th century was about what belongs to who, and the 21st century is about who belongs to what. By merely existing, you're leaving a huge data smudge in the world, but it's not in the physical world, it's up in the cloud forever. The cloud is the new infinity. And this means that feelings now legitimize lies. So what does this mean for the concept of individuality itself? Well, we ask the question, do you still feel like an individual? I'm just going to leave that as a question, and I'm sort of curious what your first impulsive internal response would have been to that question. Do you still feel like an individual? So this is all happening faster than we thought. And what if we need a new word to describe this thing that individuality is morphing into? You're now becoming your extreme self, and it's happening to you as you read these words. So this part also is from my recent piece in Harper's Bazaar, looking back on, on the book. So Oxford Dictionary's word of the year at the end of 2024 was brain rot, defined as, quote, the supposed deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state, especially viewed as the result of overconsumption of material, now politically online content, considered to be trivial or unchallenging, end quote. In the age of earthquakes, as I said, we introduced the neologism proceleration, which meant the acceleration of acceleration. Brain rot is a function of technological proceleration. Every morning we wake up and the world has changed yet again from when we first went to sleep a few hours ago, in ways that we simply couldn't have imagined just back then. And it leads to a gnawing and also an exhausting impression that our understanding of what is real lags behind where actual reality is chaotically heading. You see, every era has its magic individuals. They're endowed with special powers of sight or insight, channeling the culture and often telling the culture truths about itself it doesn't know or is too afraid to ask. In the past, magic individuals have arrived as poets, composers, scientists, novelists, or artists. There was always the next big thing out there waiting to hit us and change the way that we understood the world. Magic individuals pointed to those things and they would say, look, it's over there. There's a phrase that's helpful here from a book by Robert Hughes in 1978 called The Shock of the New. The Shock of the New. So lately, though, it's as if tech is already the next big thing, and then the next big thing, plus the big thing that comes after that. Tech is the ultimate modern magic. This makes technologians the magical individuals of today. They're figures of extraordinary persuasion and therefore of extraordinary power. And Matt Dryhurst, who works with Holly Herndon, two artists and musicians who are really at the forefront of thinking about machine learning and machine intelligence, he told me that the current world is increasingly run by shitposters, agents of chaos cosplaying as billionaire CEOs. So, you know, I want you to think, obviously, about that definition of brain rot as a form of technological the effect on your neurology from technological proceleration, and then a world where very many neurologically asymmetrical, neurodivergent billionaires are essentially determining our future through the fine art of shitposting. Since January 19th, 2025, the heads of the largest US tech companies now form the Broligarchy. They've dispensed with fact-checking, diversity, and shame. Instead, they've replaced all that with an unapologetic masculinity, to use Mark Zuckerberg's term, destroying the dream of digital decentralization with the nightmare of total corporatist centralization. Again, if you were at the Global Art Forum, hopefully you caught a session with Jaya Clara Brecker, who's one of the world experts on this theme of centralization versus centralization and the kind of the dream to nightmare pipeline that we've just seen in about 7 years, roughly. Crypto reserves, AI agents, presidential meme coins, robot dog soldiers, dismantling the civil state, exploding pages. Tech is just like microplastics. It's everywhere. So elsewhere, I've written about Endcore. It's a name I'm giving to this era after the end of eras. So Endcore is marked by a shared sense of a final historical ending in sight, while simultaneously noting that such an end never actually arrives, also known as perma-ending. So all around us are crises that come to us as collapsed narrative. Is democracy dying? Is it hotter each year? Does technology make us less human? Will wars last forever? Hint, yes, they will. There's a widespread feeling that things we once held onto as unchangeable fundamental facts are now ending. Endcore, thus, is a verb, a predicament, a texture of the time that we call the present. It's an unnerving, queasy contemplation that we have entered an after era, but it's not after one thing like modernity, post-modernity, it's after everything. Imagine the COVID-19 pandemic, but all communication networks were down as well. No online access, no Zoom Roomba parties, no dank meme therapy, no sexting user 123465 in Adelaide at 4:12 a.m. Even those of us who have pre-internet brains, you know who you are, find it virtually impossible to conceive of a functional world today without the digital network glue that makes us and everything around us move. And yet all this infinite access to all the world's knowledge, wisdom, people, and has also brought with it its own sense of impending apocalypse. We can feel every feeling in the world at the same time: despair, joy, dread. We see every horror, every beauty. We are now dependent, addicted even, to this hyper-collective emotional belonging. And so, when a pesky shark or a rogue naval ship gnaws through undersea data cables, dragging entire continents offline, the outcome is, in a very real sense, the end of the world. What comes after? You wouldn't believe it, even if I told you. So whereas tragedy is often imposed on us, comedy is something we can generate ourselves. That's why memes are Encore's native language. I'm at rock bottom, but the rocks here are so pretty. And this brings us right up to right now and to the end of my talk. Again, some of you, I think, were there a week ago. So I've just finished the latest edition of the Global Art Forum entitled The New Normal, which was curated with the duo Y7. And the new normal is the feeling we get from this incessant accumulation of chaos as progress. Or is it progress as chaos? Never, ever ask me how I am. If you do, remember this diagram. That's the end. And that was exactly 20 minutes. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Up next, we'll be joined by Susan Schuppli via Zoom, so just give us a moment to connect. Okay. Susan, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
All right,
well.
great.
Can you hear me?
I think so. Yes, we can. We're good to start.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. And then also, I can't see myself. Can you see my first slide? Hello?
Sorry. Susan? Yeah, we can see your screen. We can see your slides.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as soon as I launched my player, for some reason, I can't see anything in the room, so
Yeah.
we'll just have to work through it in that manner. But just to say thank you, first of all, for the invitation to present some aspects of my work. I'm going to focus very specifically on sound as a method of inquiry and as a material or kind of medium in and of itself, and I wanted to go through a set of different kind of projects. So my hope is that some of the things that I will signal through this presentation will be like practically useful for the kinds of activities that all the participants will engage with in the coming days. And just to say, it was lovely to meet all of the students and get a bit of a sense of you know, what you've done and what you might hope to achieve over the coming days in relationship to thinking through the medium of sound. So I'll launch my keynote. These are the areas that I want to focus on: field recordings, sonification of ice, techno-scientific listening, deep listening, singing ice, and ice talks. Um, and just, and I've got 20 minutes. I just wanted to say before I sort of walk through or speak through some of these projects and play a few clips, that sound for me has been an important part of my artistic and documentary practice. So I'm not going to talk at all about any of the sort of collaborative investigations with forensic architecture. And so this won't be this will not be something that represents the ways in which the agency has actively used sound, but also analyzed and diagnosed sound to produce insight into events of state or corporate violence. This is much more my own practice that has largely takes place within the cryosphere, that is the frozen geographies of our planet. So I'm going to take you into um, other spaces which you may or may not have spent any time with, but we're at the other end of the sort of temperature scale. Um, and I'm going to begin, I just wanted to signal this project here, Sounding Ice. So this is the most recent project I did with a group of young people in the Yukon, which is a territory in the subarctic region of Canada. And we produced a sound cartography, as it says, exploring the signals of climate change, found at the confluence of these two rivers, the Yukon being one of the world's great rivers. And so this is the kind of area that we are working in, and this is just an image of all the students. They're all local students, also First Nations, Indigenous students from the Yukon, what I brought with me was a whole range of different kinds of microphones, from geophones, hydrophones, um, microphones that can tune into the electromagnetic spectrum, microphones that are specifically designed to hear very precise micro sounds. So this was the first encounter that most of the students had with working with different kinds of microphones. And so here we are, we're drilling holes through the ice on the river. We're now standing in the middle of the river and then lowering our microphones, and the whole thing looks a bit chaotic. But all of the field recordings that the students produce then are logged very systematically on this sort of website, where you can play all the different recordings, and you can also you can get some information on the metadata, etc. And there's also lots of visual materials, the field trips that our field notes, our field trips, etc. So there's a lot to explore there. But just to say that, um, trying to use sound in my own practice, of course, has always been central. But more importantly, I really wanted to I wanted to introduce the sonic as a method for conducting research and producing insights, but also say creative, creative responses. So the students were very experimental in the ways in which they worked with the way they worked with the microphones and the kinds of recordings that they produced. So sound workshops, that's an important part of my field recording kind of practice. Um, a few years ago, I released this album called Ice Records, Sonic Explorations of the Climate Records Captured in Ice Sheets and Glaciers. Um, so this album is basically, it's comprised of a series of field recordings that were taken from various glacier sites, both that I've worked in or that other climate scientists have worked in and have shared recordings with me. So it's important to say that the use of sound in environmental monitoring is relatively new, but it's being increasingly seen as an important way of ground truthing the data that is produced by remote sensing kind of platforms. And when it comes to understanding the something like glacial recession, sound is a very good method of monitoring the ways in which glaciers recede and diminish, because the classic methods of uh, putting a series of stakes into the bed of a glacier and measuring the movements every year, that's still being done, but acoustic information really gives us a sense of the internal dynamics of ice, and we can understand through acoustic sensing um, a series of patterns that emerge, and we understand the air that is being released, the air that was captured hundreds and sometimes millions of years ago that is stored in these glaciers. Once the glaciers start to melt, it releases this air, and that air produces a very specific acoustic signature. And we really start to understand much more accurately the internal glacial dynamics that are taking place within these large bodies of frozen water. So these are just images of different sites that I've worked at and done field recordings at, and those field recordings are on the album. So from Nunavut in the Canadian Arctic, this was a field recording that a scientist did, and Martin Sharp, and he presented that field recording at the IPCC a number of years ago. So this was an interesting moment because Martin Sharp is a glaciologist, and he felt that when he presents his data within these climate forums, most of the people are dealing with a level of abstraction in relationship to the sites that the scientists are studying. They're largely dealing with Excel spreadsheets and mathematical, uh, like dealing with computation and mathematical projections and modeling. And so Martin started making field recordings because he wanted the people who are making policy decisions in these climate forums to have some sense of what it feels like to be in those locations, to create a kind of proximity, a critical proximity, if you will, to these sites of sort of radical environmental transformation that the abstractions of science somehow sometimes can't really convey. And so I included this recording that Martin made, and that he, in some way, intervened in the IPCC by playing this recording, just to remind the people there that, the world in these cryospheric geographies, like which is the Arctic, the Antarctic, the Andes, Greenland, and of course the Himalayas, the degree to which those geographies are changing at sort of 4 times the global kind of rate, that somehow is sometimes that more intimate, perceptual, experiential dimension is what is not sort of that falls by the wayside when you enter into these large transnational policy forums. I also worked with a group and continue to work with a group in northern India, and this is Drangdrung Glacier. And so here we are working both with long-term technical instruments, but also working with local mountain villagers. I'll go into that in a little detail shortly. And another site in which I've produced a number of field recordings is Svalbard, which is an archipelago with joint sovereignty between Norway and Russia. Here I am with one of my hydrophones. I was on a sailboat with a glaciologist, and we were sailing around the main island of Spitsbergen. But I wanted to play a clip from a clip that Oskar Glowacki, who's the Polish scientist, made in Hornsund in Svalbard, because Oskar is the person who's really pioneering the use of acoustics in monitoring climate change within the cryosphere. And so this is the array, an array being an assembly of microphones with a buoy attached, so the microphones float in the fjord, and they're there for many months. They're passive listening devices. The one that we used in a Drang Drung can record for 6 months continuously. It takes in information. It's not something you can listen to while it's recording. You can obviously play back the files, but most scientists will convert that acoustic information into a spectrogram so they can start to see patterns emerge. So this is the kind of setup that Oskar would use. I use a more simple setup in that I only have one large professional sort of expensive microphone. And this is one of the tracks that is on the album that Oskar made in Hornsund. I hope you could hear that, but that sort of strange um, sound, that's actually the sound of a bearded seal. So when you're trying to disentangle the information that you're capturing through methods of acoustic monitoring, you eventually have to build up a sound library. So you start to understand what are the animal sounds, what are the what's the marine biology, what's the sounds of the glacial melt and the release of air, etc. And so it's really kind of fascinating to work through these materials and to see the ways in which the scientists are there pulling apart all the frequencies so that they can start to analyze them. Um, and some other field recordings I did in Iceland. I want to move quickly. So this gives you a sense of the different kinds of contexts in which I've been working, primarily generating field recordings using various different kinds of microphones. I also wanted to just play a clip from some of the work I did in Svalbard, where I was working more with the data that is generated by the instrumentation that one finds all over the Arctic archipelago. The Arctic archipelago is completely encrusted with technological infrastructures that are monitoring the environment in different ways. And so I did field recordings. I also worked with a musician and also working with sort of data and produced a documentary. And I'll just play a little bit from this documentary, but you can start to get a sense of the ways in which I'm trying to mix these different kinds of recordings, including the data streams that are moving data through these technological modes of capture and transmission. That's very loud. Apologies if that was too loud. I tried to bring the levels down a little bit. Um, in terms of sonification, um, one of my earlier documentaries was on ice core science, and one of the things I really wanted to do in this documentary was to sonify and in some way bring the internal life of ice into presence, because the ways in which ice cores, which are samples that are drilled out of the planet's ice sheets, and these samples are then stored in purpose-built freezers. There's a handful of these, less than 10 around the world, and then slivers and chunks of ice are cut off and crushed and melted, and then they're studied by scientists. Here we can see a layer of volcanic ash in the ice core. Um, but I worked with a musician, Mohammed Safa, because I wanted to treat the ice not as a mute and silent witness waiting to be sort of revivified or brought back to life by the scientists in the laboratory. And so I worked with Safa to start to generate different sort of sonic signatures for the internal life of ice. Um, but I'll just play a few seconds from the one of the parts of the documentary, because many of you likely have not seen an ice coring operation. So just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. And I think from my calculations, I've got 5 minutes. So actually, I'm going to move at a rapid pace to the rest of my materials. Um, so this next little clip, you'll see the ways in which we started to develop an acoustic signature that is used throughout the film to suggest, as I said, the sort of dynamism of ice.
The Canadian Ice Core Archive, now at the University of Alberta, shelters this unique collection of historic ice.
Just to say that the work that we did at Drangdrung Glacier in India was with a small team from IIT Indore. We are working.
Farouk, I think we need
We are working with this soundtrack. This is the recorder that we're using that we placed at the foot of the glacier. And so, alongside this more techno-scientific kind of mode of listening, we also ran workshops with local villagers. I'm just going to zoom in.
here. We have
So, one of the things we did when we first arrived was we just were listening with our human ears, not with these like technologies for mediating kind of sound, because the glacier is full of these moulins, which are these sort of wormholes that drill through the bed of the glacier, and they really actually channel sound in a very kind of interesting way. So we're literally just placing our ears to the surface of the glacier in these moulins and really listening to the ways in which the glacier itself was uh, bringing sounds from well below its depth to the surface. I'll just play a little clip. I'm just going to move very quickly with these final few slides. We also ran different kinds of workshops using, once again, hydrophones in the crevices of the glacier and inviting uh, local the local community from Ashgau to listen with us. And this was really an effort to try and think about the kind of technical ways that we're using acoustics to monitor and measure the mass balance changes of the glacier. We also wanted to create, through these workshops that we were running on the glacier, an experience that was in some way analogous to the more techno-scientific work that we were also engaging with, but rather than being a group of sort of researchers speaking to local communities about the relevance of our work, it was like, let's think about the ways in which sound can be used to create an experience of what's at stake also in the work scientifically. And I wanted to just end with, if I may, with a couple more like images, just to say that we also, when we were in Ladakh, this time in Leh, in the city of Leh, we met Morup Namgayal, who's a song collector and a musician. And we worked with Morup to translate his old archive of poetry and songs about mountains and glaciers. And those songs have been used, and we printed a small publication, very different from the kind of book that Shumon has put together, obviously. This was a small songbook then that we printed and sent it to all of the schools in Ladakh, and it's being used in workshops by Marup and others. It's been used in workshops to try and teach a new generation some of these songs and stories and poems about environmental changes in the region. And it's important, from my perspective, to always ask the question, where does environmental knowledge reside? Where does knowledge of changes in the environment reside? We don't need to use the word climate change, but we can look to cultural materials and to these legacies of 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 poetry, of stories, of uh, folk songs, and there's also evidence of a different order. It's not the sort of data that is collected through something like the sound trap, but there's a different kind of there's different information that we can also come to understand and appreciate through these other kinds of cultural materials. Um, do I have time to play one last word that, well, maybe I just will, which is an environmentalist who I asked him about his relationship to sound. He works on something called the Ice Stupa Project, which is a project to grow artificial glaciers in Kulum village in Ladakh. And this is what Nishant had to say when I asked him about his relationship to acoustics. Our project is called Listening to Ice. Do you have any experiences of sound and glaciers that are important for you?
Sound as in acoustic, physical.
Yeah,
Yeah, ice talks a lot. We have seen that in ice stupa. If you stand inside enough ice stupa, during the day, it will have, sun is there, becoming a crack. You can hear it. You can hear when you're walking on ice. During the night, when it's melting, the water is sprinkling up and falling and instantly becoming ice right there. You can hear it. Yes, it's a very interactive. Ice, water, I mean, these kind of things, they are more like living. They communicate. It is up to you if you can reply back, basically, or if you can hear and understand. Yeah, that's true.
I'm going to stop. Great. Need to stop it there because I'm definitely at time, but I wanted to give Nishant the last word in saying that not only does ice talk, but it's more like a living being, but it's up to us to the challenges for us to understand and to take into account its expressive kind of nature. So I think that's a really important point to reflect on. So thank you very much, and apologies about, looks like I went over by about 5 minutes.
Susan, thank you. Yeah, Safeya. Up next, we have Safeya.
Hello. Great. So hello, everyone, and thank you as well for the invite. So I'll be talking at the intersection of my own fieldwork that I've done as a researcher, but also as a sound artist, as well as some projects that could maybe be helpful for the current cohort as an inspiration. Does this sound okay? Yeah. So I'll start with talking about a project that I've very recently been working on, which is sounding out Mina Zayed, and walking through the steps of how it came to be, and as well as how do I work with artists, how do I work with space, how do I choose the space that I'm looking to record, and other projects. So as part of my fellowship with with the Music and Sound Cultures Research Group that's based at Tanway Abu Dhabi, I worked on a project called Sounding Out Mina Zayed that explores of characterizing sonic spaces through listening and reimagining. I'll be particularly focusing on Mina Zayed. You can see that on the map there, which is a certain locale that is located in Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of the UAE. Here are some images of the space. So the space is a significant area in Abu Dhabi because it reflects the city's kind of urban development that was constructed in the early 1970s by our late ruler, Shahzad al-Nahyan. And it kind of signifies the bringing of industrialization to Abu Dhabi because it was the main port of the capital before until 2012 when the main kind of port operations moved to Khalifa Port, and since then Mina Zayed has been in a very kind of suspended state. And so this is a screenshot that I took from Google Maps. So it's a port area, and it features a fruit and vegetable market, it features a date market, it features cafeterias, restaurants, it has a navy port, a coding school, a cultural institution, and also a building, or a couple of buildings, that was called the Mina Plaza Tower. It was an unconstructed kind of complex that was demolished in 2022. I believe, or 2021. And since then, Mina Zayed has been in a very suspended liminal state, and it's precisely that liminal state that made me interested in that area as a place of research. And currently there are a lot of redevelopment projects that are happening in the area, and reconstruction of certain warehouses that used to be in the space that belong to different kind of entities that are currently being rebuilt for creative entrepreneurship opportunities. So I use the word on sounding out a lot in my research and my paper that I wrote. I read that the Experience Abu Dhabi website, which draws a lot of tourists into understanding, what is Abu Dhabi and what to experience in Abu Dhabi. They mentioned Mina Zayed as a place that is an urban treasure, and it's a place to take characterful photographs, because there's a lot of history in the area in terms of trade, family business, and a lot of vessels stopping by. So I'm talking about ADNOC vessels as well as cruise ships. In that regard, I wanted to ask, what does it mean to take characterful sound recordings of the space as opposed to photographs? And for decades, Mina Zayed has really been kind of the backbone of trade and things coming in. And of the city's economy. So in comparison, which is the neighboring island of Saadiyat Island, so actually if I go back at this map, so you have the main city of Abu Dhabi is here. This is Mina Zayed. You have Saadiyat Island here, which is known as the cultural island. You have all these mega museums, the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the Guggenheim, the Natural History Museum, the Team Lab, which just opened last week. And then you drive along the road and you have Al Jubail Island, which is a very nature-based island. You have the mangroves and a major housing redevelopment project that promises those who live there to have a real connection with nature. And you drive past, there are a few islands still in development, and you have Yas Island, which is, it's an entertainment island. You have all these theme parks, entertainment venues, kind of this world kind of recognized track, like for F1. So along this road, you have all these carefully curated islands, and you have the main city of Abu Dhabi, and in the middle, kind of between that, you have this, you have Mina Zayed. And I think that's another thing that drew me into kind of looking at that space as a place of inquiry. Because I think that in comparison to all those islands, Mina, with its kind of multiplicity, can be used as a space with various identities and complex kind of overlapping soundscapes in comparison to those carefully curated islands that are along that road. And so I ask, what happens when neighboring areas or semi-islands reshape their natural soundscapes to create curated theme spaces? And what voices will emerge from Mina as development progresses? So those were my main research questions. So this is just a very few kind of points of reading that I included in my literature review. So this is kind of my primary literature review that I listed below, and obviously there are more. And I look into texts that offer insight into the architectural and the urban development in the region, so primarily focusing on adaptive refuse and community-driven initiatives, especially in industrial spaces. And a good example is the ongoing Mizza initiative, which is looking at reconstructing and redeveloping kind of the warehouses area that I showed in this picture. So all of these warehouses that are that used to exist are being rebuilt into these creative spaces and entrepreneurial spaces. And by synthesizing these diverse perspectives and narratives, I try to find different and valuable insight into how I can have a more effective approach to understanding Mina. And I also look at different artists' work, but I'm not going to touch on that now in interest of time. This is a snapshot that I took from the Abu Dhabi Plan 2030 book that was, don't remember now when it was published, but quite a while ago, that had all these plans for what Abu Dhabi should look like as an emirate by the year 2030. None of it really came into effect. They promised to build a metro, they promised to, so this is what they wanted Mina Zayed to be. You can't really see here, but if I zoom in, there's like a color code into what would be high density residential areas, and at the moment there's absolutely no residential areas in Mina Zayed. So I talk, I put this here and I'll refer to it later. So collecting artist insights. So I've identified this space, I've done literature review, and I thought, okay, how do I approach, aside from myself as an artist and collecting and doing field recordings, how do I approach my collaborators and my people of who do I interview, who do I know more about the space? And I work primarily with 2 artists on this project, and what I found interesting is through my readings and through my communications, I'm pretty sure some of you are, or maybe most of you are aware of Yasser El-Shistawi's work. He's published a lot on the architecture and urbanism in the UAE and in the region wide. And he's been quoted in the book by Rana Al-Matawa, who published a book that talks about the kind of urban experience in Dubai. And she quotes saying that just as how we depict low-income spaces that are less regulated, are examples of true urbanity where certain forms of resistance emerges at the margins of the space. And while I do agree, I do think that Al-Matawa presents kind of, he suggests adapting to public urban spaces as the way to go, reflecting on people and practice, or rather the practice of the people, as in the UAE there's a strong desire for safety and consideration of like sanitation effects. That takes place throughout the country. And she kind of proposes that people both seek cultural richness and comfort at the same time. And I see that in Mina Zayed, given its liminality, it can serve different audiences that can be also an appropriate space to cater to different social groups. Instead of isolating and romanticizing kind of low income and unregulated spaces as icons and definitions of true urban spaces. And I mentioned that because, again, right now, Mina Zayed is in a very unregulated space. It's a place where you see people kind of take over the streets, take over the roads, and play cricket and play football. Because, there's no police kind of patrolling. It's a very open space. And there have been quite a few articles that focus on Mina Zayed, primarily on the migrant worker communities. But in conversation with my researchers and colleagues, I see that there are more narratives that require documentation, such as the local family history, and I'm talking about the Emirati family histories that existed and the trade that took place in Mina Zayed and helped grow the port area, and try to counter this idea of an authentic fetishized narrative of space, which is sometimes typical, and sidelighting other important narratives within Mina. So I worked with 2 photographers and visual artists. One whose name is Mansour Al-Hira, the other Walid Al-Madani, so both photographers, videographers, and the focus points were on 3 main areas, one which is the warehouses area of Mina Zayed, one which is the fruit and vegetable market, and the port and restaurants area. And I walked around and really had a very dialogic approach with these photographers and videographers, and asking how they've been experiencing the place in the past, how they're experiencing it in the present, and how they envision it to experience it in the future. And I just put in more information about Mansour on the slide, in case you're interested. And these are just snapshots from our visits to the space. And then Walid Al-Madani is Syrian, Abu Dhabi born and raised, and is no stranger to Mina Zayed. He used to visit there a lot when he was younger with his uncle. So I understand this is something that I write in my paper, which is I work primarily with the creative class, so the creative middle class, as opposed to interviewing the people who work there. And I thought that in selecting both Al-Madani and Al-Hira, and I write in the slides why I decided to work with them, they helped me shape my understanding and my sonic inquiry of the space, because they have a visual understanding of space, being photographers and videographers, and I wanted to see how can I counter that with my sonic inquiry, so it complements very well. But also, given that they frequent the place a lot, I wanted to consider this idea of consumption. So people who always visit the fruit and vegetable market, So I think about, what does consumption mean when we're not buying, but we're just there to visit a space and consume its sound, or it's consume it visually or sonically. So we, in having all these conversations, I tried to think about my collaborations with them as people who possess a creative approach to understanding spaces and landscapes visually. And I prioritize those explorations over and narratives and personal experience and imaginative explorations over traditional investigations, such as communicating with the urban planners and the workers who are currently developing Mina Zayed, as well as those who work in these restaurants and cafeterias and whatnot. And then I collected and conducted field recordings in the area. And this is something that that was kind of, it's almost like a tree that has two branches. One is the collecting the artist insight. The other is considering sonic effects. So I looked very much into the book called Sonic Experience, A Guide to Everyday Sounds by Jean-François Gouillard and Harry Torg, who are part of the Croissant research team. And they explore how sound shapes our experience of urban space, not only as a physical phenomena, but also as a deeply social and cultural one. And the book introduces the concept of soundscape, so interplay of signal and speech and noise and environment. And what they do is they present like a taxonomy of sonic effects that reveal how we perceive and act within acoustic spaces. So I'm thinking about those who work with digital audio workstations, those who are also musicians and composers. When you think about this idea of crescendo, when you think about something like a filter, these are things that you can actually hear in real time when you walk through, for example, from a busy road through a narrow alley, you can hear that actual filter being applied in real life. So this is something that Auguyad and Torg kind of talks about, is how do we take these sonic effects that we use in our practice and apply to them in real life through listening when we are in the urban space. And how these effects help articulate a relationship between sound, memory, and social dynamics in specific places. In my case, Mina Zayed. Rather than treating sound as a background, what the authors do is that they argue that understanding urban sound is, it could be a compositional and interpretive tool using these sound effects. And something that we as sound artists can use to reflect, critique, and reimagine spatial and cultural change. And this is just like a little diagram that I've kind of put together of how this can work and how this can kind of aid one another and how we can understand that. So the work itself, the research work is it's a work in progress, and there are a few end products. One of them was the installation that I've done a trial version of, and it features collected recordings stitched into sound collages that progress thematically based on where audiences flash a light on. So after talking with my collaborators, after collecting my field recordings of the different areas of Mina Zayed, you can see in the diagram there's a layout of a room, and these are the different sensors. And over here, so basically there are 12 speakers on the floor, and when a person shines a light on one of the speakers, it triggers a sound or a certain recording that I've linked. And in this kind of diagram, it represents a letter and numbering system where each block is represented by the sounds that will be played. And the letters is basically, so, W1 would be the sounds of the warehouses area in the past. What are the keywords that I've taken from these field walks that I've gone to with my collaborators. And W3, for example, is what are the sounds of the vegetable market in the predicted future. The person that I've walked with, sorry, not W3, it was V3. Was it V3? Yeah, I read plastic bag with bugs because Walid al-Manili imagined that in the future the vegetable market might sell insects, and that will be our way of sustaining that will be our main food source. So this is really just a diagram of the installation that I've run a trial version of. That was mainly on sounding out Mina Zayed, and how I kind of found the space that I found interesting and used it as a space of inquiry sonically. I'll talk very quickly about some other projects which could be used as a source of inspiration. So narrated liquid contaminants was a project that started in 2021. It was a project where I've went out and used some of the microphones that the previous presenter talked about, including geophones and microphones that you put in the water, to collect recordings of water, very much focusing on this idea of contamination. So I walked around different areas of Abu Dhabi and collected recordings, it was an installation that was divided into 4 sections, so e-waste, human-caused pollution, natural contaminated water, and viral contaminant. And this was an installation where there were 4 suspended bottles, in which if one were to touch the bottle, it would trigger a sound and kind of video. And this was really me trying to understand the relationship between humans and environmental contamination, specific to the area of Abu Dhabi. And I'm happy to talk more about this later. Music of the Crafts was an installation as well that I worked on starting in 2023, and it's a continuous project. We've done a lot of recordings of female craftswomen and traditional Emirati, doing traditional Emirati crafts, and trying to see how we can experiment with those very intricate sounds that they do while they're doing those crafts, and spatialize that into an experience where people actually sit in a room and listen to it in a multi-channel setup. And this was another one that was presented at the Folklife Festival, the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, where we've collaborated on creating this structure and 2 seating areas. So one focused on living landscape and the other on living memory. Living landscape in terms of focusing on collecting field recordings across the UAE, so environmental and urban field recordings. And the other living memory is trying to collect recordings on people and their narrative. And this was a very tough project because in a country like the UAE, it's always hard to consider, what are the narratives that we include and what we exclude, and how to work with people from so many different nationalities. So this was probably the hardest installation that I worked on, just because of how complex it can be to be a curator, so to say, when you're selecting the sounds that you're working with, especially if you're considering people and not only sounds of places and spaces and animals, so the biological and the geological. Also, as part of the research group that I've worked with, we do a lot of documentation of traditional music of the region. So this is a project that we've finally kind of finished, which was documenting the music of the Shuh, which is a tribe that's, it belongs, or rather they exist in the northern parts of Ras Khaimah, but also neighboring kind of Oman, and they have, not only do they have their own dialect that even some Emiratis from the southern region cannot understand, they also have their own performances that are protected and are only shared between Ras Khaimah and Oman. And there's been a lot of certain rumors about, due to the colonial past of Portugal and Ras Khaimah, there have been a lot of speculations about these practices being influenced by Portuguese art and Portuguese traditional music. And so this study has really been us trying to understand whether or not that's true, and really giving them the space to kind of perform their art. and documenting it using different microphones, because a lot of traditional performance is actually very spatial, and to do justice you need to use certain microphones that capture that spatiality and that movement. So this was that. Do I have time? This was a performance where I've worked with traditional performers of the UAE and synthesized in real time the sound that they were singing and the sounds that were coming out of their performance into a kind of an ambient and sonic composition. And this was a performance for Festival X in 2022, where I also collaborated with a visual artist, where he took their movements and also synthesized it with real time. And a lot of that is also in the background is me working with these artists and trying to understand, what is their, what is their movement, what are the sounds that they do, what are the words that they sing, because some of those traditions are also, the language is shared across the regions. Some of the lyrics and then the words that they use in the songs actually it's in African, and it's always an interesting kind of back and forth and understanding what exactly are you working with. And you get into a lot of conversations about how those lyrics came to be, and how those sounds and those rhythms came to be, and how they became Emiratiized, rather borrowed from all these different cultures. I think two more. This was a project actually that I've been commissioned by Al-Serkal back in 2023. And this was a very interesting one, actually. I had a lot of fun with this. And it was basically a bus that drove from Al-Serkal to different locations in the UAE, and in my case it was to the Sharjah Biennial. And for this piece, I was asked to create something that will be presented on this bus during that trip. And I thought I would actually create a piece where actually what I've done is I've done the drive myself from Al-Serkal to the location, and I've considered, again, playing around with this idea of past, present, and future. I picked 3 locations from point A to point B, and I've tried to think about, one of those locations, what it would sound like in the past, again, in the present, and the future, and created these sonic collages. So as the bus was moving across the creek area, I decided to focus on the past narratives and how that place would have sounded like in the future. Very much taking a lot of my field recordings that I've done from the Maritime Heritage Festival in Abu Dhabi, which happens almost every year. And in that festival, they do a lot of reenactions of these songs, but also the practices that people had, the fish auctions that we don't have anymore, but that did exist. And there's a lot of performativity around that that I decided to kind of incorporate into this piece. And Resound UAE, I won't go much into this, but this was just a project that I've tried to create that was really an alternative platform that made me consider how others can utilize transient spaces and creating kind of pop-ups with institutions and events. So I'm thinking about how to encourage artists and non-artists to explore sound freely and practice the active listening in a way where, again, I say artists and non-artists because there are people who come from different backgrounds or who don't exactly title themselves as an artist, but they do work at an intersection of sonic inquiry. And we're also in the process of kind of creating online and physical repositories and resources, sonic resources for the community. This is a bibliography of the different readings that I've looked into for the Sounding Out Mina Zaid project. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Safeya. Up next, we have John Thabiti Willis.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Suha, for organizing this event. Thank you to fellow panelists, to the students, to other guests, visitors, and frequent attendees here at Al Circal. Can you hear me very clearly? Okay. So this presentation reflects ongoing research on African involvement in the history and memory of pearling in the Gulf. It has 4 dimensions represented in the 4 images you see here. Those dimensions include an emphasis on museums and heritage, an emphasis on British colonial archives, more specifically manumission records that I'll reference briefly, increasing incorporation and work with GIS mapping, and I'm doing that with the manumission records, and more recently, ethnography, focused on a band in Bahrain that performs music associated with pearling. And so these dimensions inform this presentation. This is the first time that I've been thinking in this very specific way about sound. And so I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts, your reactions to this. Museums and other heritage sites, along with studies of pearling, the pearling industry in the Gulf focus predominantly on men who've labored as merchants, boat captains, and pearl divers. They represent merchants like Ben Mater, represented here, and a house that stands preserving his name as having reaped the greatest returns, and a ethnically, racially unidentified group of divers as having endured the greatest hardships, with no house or physical structure that is left representing an individual diver. Right? Boat captains occupied a kind of middle class, and you see that reflected here in a smaller structure devoted to a captain in Bahrain. Surviving the dangers that threatened the livelihood and lives of men who labored aboard pearling vessels and in the surrounding waters marked an important rites of passage. In this official national narrative, the natural environment of the sea and its maritime life emerges as the main adversary of divers. British colonial records documenting the testimonies of runaway slaves, mostly first and second generation African, a lesser number of Baluchi, and then other Persian and Arab, not only detail the tribulations that divers and other laborers reported, they also, according to my previously published work, depict slave masters instead of nature, chance, or divine intervention as the main cause of the suffering of divers. These findings trouble official representations of pearl diving, particularly the treatment of divers at such heritage sites. An analysis of heritage sites and manumission records has been a major focus of my research over the last decade. More recently, that focus has shifted expanded to traditional bands organized around dars or music houses in Muharraq, an island part of the Bahrain archipelago, that have garnered recognition by the state as UNESCO World Heritage, right? So especially the music associated, figure music is one particular genre that has garnered such a status. These dars are comprised of men who are former members who in previous generations were members of pearling crews, but those represented here are descendants of those crews who meet weekly, oftentimes to enjoy tea and coffee and to rehearse and perform. This band here is known as Ismail Dawas, and its leaders claims that they were formed in 1935 by a former member of a pearling crew. In this presentation, I'll show, you'll hear an audio and I'll show a video clip of a performance that reflects on the relationship to the history and memory of pearling. I draw on Karen Amimoto's, Ingersoll's notion of a seascape epistemology, which moves the ocean from the periphery as the backdrop to the center as a dynamic source of knowledge and active participant in the multisensory production of meaning about pearling. This approach is based on the visual, spiritual, and embodied spatial literacy of the seascape, marked by the movements of the sun and its impact on crews and the musicians who are their descendants. Emotion, according to Ingersoll, is crucial to the engagement with an oceanic literacy of fear, elation, tranquility, anticipation, anxiety, pride, as divers descended to the bottom of the sea, using their hands to feel, grasp, and collect oysters, to return to the surface with the promise of a new life as a successful pearl fisherman. Analyze the ways in which the musicians emote through their voices and their bodies and the kind of experience they create for the audience. I'm interested also in how the verses function along verses of the song alongside the nonverbal aspects of their performance. Communicate along a complex emotional spectrum as they navigate the ongoing demands on their labor. So in a moment, I'm going to play a minute or approximately a minute of a recording that occurred just in this space that you see here. Note the, so yeah, I'll play that, and then there's a few things. Then I'll play, so you'll just see the audio here in the first, because I want you to really take in the sound of it, right? And then I'm going to replay it again, but with the video, so you can see how they're also using their bodies within the performance. And I'm interested in the expression of emotion, both in terms of just the sound that you hear, their relationship of how they use their voice with music, and then how they use that with their bodies as well. The lyrics that they are reciting involve repeating highly elongated renderings of words that are extracts from songs, some of the verses of which are written here. More research is needed on the process of studying and deciding, on the process of studying how they decide which aspects of words that are available in published texts that circulate among various bands, how they go about the process of deciding what to perform publicly, right? Like other African diasporic musical forms, artistic creativity, improvisation, remixing, call and response, and syncopation are involved. What is most important to consider in relation to my own questions is the tone and inflection that characterizes their vocalization of specific words in the lyrics that makes it extremely difficult for native Arabic speakers even, including a Bahraini ethnomusicologist who actually has worked closely with these musicians. Some of you may know of him, Hassan Hujeri, who's the director of the music department at the Sharjah Art Foundation. To discern much about what is being communicated beyond the depth of emotion that the singers are embodying. So for instance, if you compare the first two verses of the lyrics here for a moment, note the more abstract reference to some level of suffering, right? My heart has too many wounds. What is the reason for this journey we take? I myself don't have the power to withstand the distance between myself and my loved ones, right? Versus in the second, where there's more of a kind of clear antagonist, right? You who are wealthy and who owns this ship have the final say in everything. Why don't you listen to my complaints? Why do you believe what other people say and not what we say, right? So there's a clear placing and scapegoating here. Here in the translations of the lyrics from the audio video you have witnessed are extracted. In the first verse, of course, the narrator identifies his wounded heart, the questions for the reason of the journey. He feels powerless to cope with the distance from loved ones. This approach allows for an expression of dissatisfaction without scapegoating, of course, any person. Keeping in mind the official heritage narrative of pearling, the listener may wonder if the pain is caused simply by life circumstance. The lyrics in the second verse address the captain's indifference to their complaints, questioning why he listens to others instead of hearing the voices of those who are doing the work. He points to the power imbalance in their relationship, where the divers' hardships are ignored. Implicitly, the songs highlight the captain's authority and unjust division of labor, where the diver bears the burden while the captain reaps the rewards. The drawn-out notes resonate the length, intensity, and bodily experience of work. By stretching the words and slowing down the rhythm, the singers heighten the emotional content of the song, giving more weight to the themes of isolation, hardship, endurance, and longing. This is especially the case for divers who spend much of their time isolated from the rest of the group, right, underwater or in the water. The extended melodies mirror the slow, repetitive, and often strenuous nature of work at sea. Now, I'm asserting that by stretching and contracting the words to make this so obscure to audience members, almost as to mask the fullness of what is being felt and communicated among the performers. What are they staging, we may ask? Is this a conversation among insiders in the presence of outsiders? Outsiders being the audience? This is a common strategy, if we take it as such. It resonates, at least, with strategies that are quite common among enslaved people in the Americas and other similarly situated people throughout the African diaspora and around the world who struggled in the face of a kind of exploitive labor regime. This is the reason why I believe, or why, at least in my research, taking a kind of African diasporic framework, I feel like is very key to making sense of some of the performances As my colleague just in the previous presentation mentioned some of the African influences, right? Some of that does show up. It's not heard in the way in which I'm about to specify in these songs, but in terms of the way in which various Swahili words circulate in various songs performed here in the Gulf in Pearling music. Hujeri believes that musicians perform Pearling music in the Gulf may hide jokes among the performers who during a time of Pearling were the divers and pullers on diving vessels that make the bosses, boat captains and owners, the kind of butt of the joke or object of critique. The cost for singing in such a manner that would be easily intelligible to the captains or even to those who might be their descendants sitting before the performers could lead to some form of retaliation in the contemporary or historically. Going back to the historical, remembering when they were at sea, the captain could decide how to punish members on such vessels. On-sea rebellions are not part of official histories, but investigation as to their historicity among Pearling crews may come with more ethically responsible research. Pearl diving songs often encode their critique through metaphors of nature, struggle, and fate. The songs focus on the diver's hardship, physical exhaustion, dangerous conditions, and separation from loved ones, but rarely name captains, merchants responsible for those conditions. Instead, these figures are masked by broader references to the sea or the harshness of life. By centering the diver's experiences and leaving the agents of their suffering unnamed, songs create space to critique without directly challenging the social order. The suffering of divers becomes a way to critique a system without explicitly identifying its beneficiaries. The dual process of revealing and concealing allows a critique that is nuanced and indirect. As we reflect on these narratives, we may ask, what does it mean for the descendants of pearl divers to perform such songs at state-sponsored events today? Do these performances still carry hidden meanings of resistance, or have they been co-opted by the various systems they once critiqued? Ultimately, the stories of pearl divers, whether through song, but through many other medium that I didn't have a chance to, because of time, to explore today, reveal the complex and layered histories of Gulf societies, histories that resist easy categorization and continue to complicate our understanding of heritage, of the relationship of nature and environment, and of how sound mediates social relations. Thank you.
Can we start by asking, how many of you have heard of ASMR before? Fantastic. And when did you first experience any of the ASMR experiences? Has it been less than a year? More than a year? When was more than a year? Fantastic. ASMR has been around since 2010. Although a lot of people thought that it started with COVID, actually it started way before that. Jennifer Lin, I believe Lin, yes, is the one who actually discovered it through reacting differently to sounds. And what triggered a lot of people to get into it is how it stimulates certain parts of the brain by exposing, yeah, okay. Sorry, I was looking at something here. So it starts by creating certain stimuli based on the sounds, the textures, the visuals, and how that pushes the brain to induce the production of dopamine, which makes us feel happier because it triggers the reward system in the body. So people react differently, about 20%, as per a recent study, that only 20% of people get to experience ASMR. ASMR stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, which is basically, in simple words, how we react to certain sounds in a pleasant way. Some people claim that it helps with reducing depression. Some, for my experience, personal experience, I'll tell you about it in a second, it helped with anxiety relief and sleep help, or sleep aid. So basically what ASMR does is, like I said, stimulates certain noises. And how is ASMR different from white noise, pink noise, and brown noise? What also was discussed earlier. So white noise, think about it as the AC, the sound of the fridge, something that is running constantly for longer durations. The pink ones are like, the pink noises are like the sounds of the ocean, the waves, rainfalls, lightning, so, or like the thunder, obviously not the lightning, but the thunder. So all of these are pink noises. Cat purring is another form of sound, and it's brown noise. And how is all of that different from ASMR? All of these sounds kind of mask the other surroundings, versus ASMR, which stimulates actual physical reactions to it. So, without getting into too much, how did I start in ASMR? I had a very highly pressuring and stressful job during COVID. Like a lot of us, we were working remotely, so we were doing a lot of extra work, a lot of hours on the computers, etc. After that, after about 6 or 7 months, I went into a complete burnout. The only thing that was helping me move on was literally ASMR. And it started with one of the types, not necessarily this one that you're going to experience now, but each and every type of ASMR affects us differently. And each one of us reacts to a different type of ASMR. So I do encourage you to go ahead and listen to different, what they call oddly satisfying, ASMR, sleep aid, anxiety relief, depression relief, any of these categories. If you Google them or search on IG or TikTok, you'll find a lot of content and test yourself to see what you respond to. We work with a lot of materials. The ones that we are going to be representing here today is magnesium carbonate, which is gym chalk. It comes in a form like this. This is like a solid one. I just unwrap the rest of them so I make it faster. We use sodium carbonate, we use calcium carbonate, iron oxide, even cornstarch, sand, kinetic sand, pretty much any material that solidifies, like any powdered material that solidifies when you add a liquid to it. Then when it dries, you'll be able to crush it. So this is basically what we do. Without further going into more details, do you have any questions that we can start with, or do we go ahead with the crush? We use, professionally, we use masks, hair covers, and clothes, like long sleeve, but today it was not possible. But for the most, because these are very, very fine particles, and sometimes because of the, how do you call it? The properties of gym chalk, which is magnesium carbonate, is like it's very, very highly absorbent to fluids and liquids. So when it's inhaled for a longer duration, it causes hazards on the lungs. So most of the artists will have these type of industrial masks while they're performing the crushes. Okay, so I hope you enjoy.
Thank you.
I have a few samples that you can try. Do you have any questions? Please.
They made the screen that much larger for us to see it and feel immersed in it. And, so how much of it is the sound and how much of it is everything else? There's a lot of visual cues as well, right?
So some, I think I'm loud enough. So some get stimulated visually, some get stimulated auditory, some both. There are a lot of people who would actually just watch it and not listen to it, just like watch it on mute, and still feel the tingling sensation of a past experience of how it would feel playing with the sand on the beach or playing with Play-Doh as a child. So some get triggered more than others visually. For the sounds, I was one of them that actually started with the sound option because I went from not being able to sleep for like 2-3 hours, like tossing and turning in bed, to simply just playing one of those sounds, just laying it next to me in bed, and being able to sleep in literally 3 minutes. So, but again, it differs from one person to the other, how you respond to the visual part, this one. The creative part, as the artist, or as the experience that we feel, is that it stimulates the creative senses because you have to think of a concept. If you like free-forming, because most of the artists prefer to use just like pre-molds, like silicone molds or other materials, creativity becomes more when you're able to sculpt, because this is like literally solid enough, so you can actually sculpt it into shapes. Or you can freeform, basically mix enough amount of liquid into it to freeform, basically shape anything. But then again, that triggers the part of the creativity within the creator itself. So the stimulation basically depends on us, our past experiences, how we feel about it, and what triggers us from one person to the other. It's a completely different process. But thank you for the question. That's a very interesting one, though. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Suha, for the opportunity and for organizing all of this. And I hope you join me in the back when we're done. I would invite everybody else, if anybody is interested, to kindly proceed and feel the sensation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the...
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rusha. It's been really a joy engaging with you and talking to you about the work. And yeah, if anyone wants to crush before you leave, well, we're done for the day also for the cohort. So thank you. Thank you very much.